Okay, I have
Great.
been working on my activity report for 2025 for me and the research group that I coordinate. And it once again, every year, makes me think about what is it that we're doing and why. And so I'll kind of go through what we've done in the last year and what we're planning to do this year and then why we're doing it. And that will set the stage for this first slide that summarizes what we're going to talk about today. So what have I been doing in the last year, in 2020, in the last, let's say, 15 months or so? Mentoring students. We have 3 master's students and 2 PhDs working here locally as well as in Peru and Hawaii. We're starting field work in the Galápagos. We've been to the Galápagos 3 times to start our field work there. Lab work at a radiometric dating lab. We've worked there 3 times in the last year, including last week. We presented several posters, 3 at the Geological Society of America meetings in San Antonio and 1 in New Orleans at the American Geophysical Union meetings. Reports to the General Conference Faith and Science Council, written a paper that's been published in the International Geological Review on our research in Peru, given lectures in Montemorelos, at the General Conference session in St. Louis, at the seminary at Andrews University, and for Creation Sabbath at the church that I attend here in Calamasa. As well as attending some meetings in Australia, out of which comes a book chapter, and that book chapter is the basis for what I'm going to talk about today. Also, an active presence on the internet, hundreds of posts to Facebook, as well as thousands of posts about news items to the Geoscience website, and also a couple marathons. I ran the LA Marathon this last Sunday. So what am I planning to do this year? We have 2 new students that will be doing research in the Galápagos. Probably we are hoping to have 3 more papers published. 2 have been submitted about our research in Peru just in the last couple of weeks. Continuing our field work both in Hawaii and in Peru, hopefully in the next couple months. A field conference in Washington State looking at the Columbia River basalts, and hopefully teaching a class in Avondale. So what's the purpose of all of this? And what is it that we have to say? I would say our purpose is not trying to vindicate God, as Job's friends seem to do, but instead to do as Job did, as you find in Job 13:15, where he totally trusted God, but asked the hard questions. So our goal is to honor the Creator and draw people to Jesus. So I have 54 slides in this presentation, and I'm not going to try to cover everything on each slide, but if some of the topics or some of the points in the slides catch your interest, let me know in the question and answer part, and I will come back and spend some more time on them. So I'm going to spend maybe 30 minutes or maybe a little bit more time than that on going through this PowerPoint presentation, and then we can come back and look at some of them again if you would like. So making friends with scientists, sharing Jesus as a good and powerful creator and recreator. And as I have written this book chapter, based on a presentation I gave in Brisbane last May, the editors of the book suggested I divide the topic into 4 parts. How do I live with the tensions between science and religion? How do I go about doing rigorous science in my research? How do I develop relationships with people? And how do I work within the science community? So I've divided up my presentation into those 4 parts. So how do we go about catching a scientist's attention? And this is what I put in the little intro to my talk. I'm not going to go through all of those, but there's different ways that people try. Maybe all of them are good under some situations. There are some that I prefer more than others. There are a few pages in the book Christ Object Lessons that I have found helpful in thinking how to reach the well-educated. There it says, the first to hear the call should be those who belong to the higher ranks of society, those with large inventive faculties and scientific insight, men of genius, the most intellectual, who are looked upon as the world's most gifted. It requires personal labor. They should be sought with tender affection. Then she says, the success of the gospel message does not depend upon learned speeches, deep arguments. Often words well prepared and studied have little influence. Success depends upon the simplicity of the message and its adaptation to souls that are hungering. They are often refreshed by the simple words of one who loves God. And I often go to the Desire of Ages. The Savior did not despise education. Though rich, learned, and honored, Nicodemus had been strangely attracted by the humble Nazarene. Men of the highest education in the arts and sciences have learned precious lessons from Christians, and even the most highly educated were charmed by his words. So, how do I go about living with the tensions between science and religion? First, some theology, some about the science conflict. How do I go about harmonizing them? Part of it is to recognize that ultimately the Creator is far beyond our understanding. And I have had to adjust my hope. Although my faith continues to be strong after 40 or 50 years of working in this area, I have had to adjust my hopes as to what I hope to find. So as far as the theology, time is the big issue that I've been studying. It's part of our name as Seventh-day Adventists. 7-day talks about a recent historic creation and a recent entrance for evil. Also, the second advent prophecy looks to a short future and a soon restoration to good. And the time issue has to do with evil. In Revelation 6, the saints under the altar ask, how long, O Lord, to get the bad stuff over as quickly as possible? So for me, the issue seems to be theodicy. Why is there evil if God is a good God? And this was the issue for Charles Darwin. He said, I cannot persuade myself that a beneficent and omnipotent God would have designedly created the ignominied wasp with the express intention of their feeding within the living bodies of caterpillars. And he felt like natural law provided a better answer because it's indifferent to the cruelty and pain of nature and to human misery. And this was a question I was asked by a nuclear physicist when I went to work in Moscow back in the early 90s. And I worked at a particle accelerator in Dubna on the Volga River. And to travel there, we went along a canal, a canal that ocean-going ships could travel between the Volga River and the Moscow River. And this lady asked the question within the context that I came to understand. This canal was dug by Stalin's political prisoners in the 1930s, where tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of them died digging that canal. And this lady was asking me, why is it that God allows something like that? And I would suggest that even though we don't have an answer for evil, some of the clues for understanding how to deal with it are within the framework of the origins discussion. And I have a lecture that I give about this, and I divide it into 6 parts. Some clues about evil. God made a good creation, so evil is not God's fault. God wanted beings who could freely love him, thus the possibility of a fall. God is just, and will judge the bad stuff fairly. The Creator himself feels the evil, and the incarnation is an example of that he has felt that evil throughout history, but especially seen in the cross. It's only for a moment, it's limited in time, and there'll be a recreation where evil will be eradicated forever. And the Sabbath is a symbol of the creation, that God is the Lord of time. God's wisdom is greater than evidence and our evidence and logic. We can rest from trying to explain everything. We have a personal God who cares for people, and we worship the Creator by studying the creation. Also, you see it in the three angels' messages. However, as I work with my science, I see a conflict. On the one hand, I see Exodus 20:11, the fourth commandment, talking about God as the creator of everything, who did it in 6 days. But as I do my science, my geology research finds there is no short-age working model for what happens here on the Earth. Horizontally, plate tectonics; vertically, the geologic column; and radiometric dating for time. And these are the main areas that our research is looking at. So what is the relation between them? The Genesis record does not seem to be easily confirmed by science as nicely as the church's teaching on health. And I would suggest perhaps that's because origins has to do with one-time events rather than ongoing processes. So how do we harmonize them? And I don't have any simple answer to that. I would suggest that different people use different methods to try to harmonize them, and I find advantages and disadvantages to each one. The Young Universe people suggest that everything is by fiat and everything happened in a short time frame. Seventh-day Adventists seem to be, many, not all, but many Seventh-day Adventists seem to be comfortable with an old earth, young life point of view, where the inorganic, the geology, some geology, cosmology can have happened by process, but then other happened by fiat and biology. There are various versions of the intelligent design group. Often they seem to be comfortable with process for the geology, cosmology, paleontology, but they feel like God intervened specifically in the biological processes, in biological evolution. Theistic evolution suggests God uses processes. Pure naturalism sees the processes and says that there is no God behind those processes. So looking at fiat and process and how one relates those to our understanding of the part that God plays directly and the part that he plays indirectly in upholding the laws of nature. So there's plenty that can be said about this, and we can come back to that later. I'll just give you a couple examples. One is from the Desire of Ages, talking about the feeding of the 5,000. Through natural agencies, the same work is accomplished that was wrought in the feeding of the multitude. So there you see something happen very rapidly, but in the Desire of Ages, it says this happens every day where the farmer sows his seed, but it is the life from God that causes the seed to germinate. Similarly, in the New Testament, you had miraculous healings, but today we have physicians that can encourage those same kind of healings using natural processes, water to wine, and so forth. But ultimately, I would suggest that God is far beyond our understanding. In science, I see paradoxes. How is it possible that light can be both a wave and a particle? I don't know much about the theology, but it seems like sometimes there's paradoxes in theology. How is it possible that God knows the end from the beginning, but yet we have free will? How is it possible that Jesus is both the creator and the created at the same time? And then I have various quotations from the Bible there with other examples. My ways are higher than your ways. Jesus had many things to say, but you cannot bear them now. Paul heard unspeakable words in paradise. And then the love chapter, we only know in part, and eventually even that knowledge will be done away. So as I look at the science, I see that the limits in science suggest to me God's power and the need for something more. The incompleteness theorem from math, in the new physics, determinism, objectivity, and reductionism is lost. The cosmology points to some kind of a beginning and some kind of a beginner that started things off. Design for life and the fine-tuned physical constants. And then areas I really don't know much about in biology, the origin of life, complex design, conscious mind, and so forth. So just how God accomplished the work of creation, he has never revealed to man. Human science cannot search out the secrets of the Most High. In the book Education, it says, he might have made suggestions in scientific lines that till the close of time would have afforded food for thought and stirred. My screen is covered up here on one side. I guess I need to, here we go. Okay. Has afforded food for thought and stimulus for invention. But he did not do this. He said nothing to gratify curiosity or to stimulate selfish ambition. The mysteries of the Bible are there because of our weakness and ignorance. And then finally, here in the Desire of Ages, our Heavenly Father has 1,000 ways to do things of which we know nothing. And I think that often we have way too small a picture of God. When I was a kid, my brother gave me the book, Your God is Too Small. The first half of it gives a bunch of examples of too small a picture of God that I really appreciated. One of them was the grand old man. So you think, well, God, Jesus would understand how farmers and fishermen work, but would he understand how computers today work, jet aircraft, modern medical technology? And I have found it interesting that we have both the first and second commandment that are saying something different. The first one says, don't worship others besides the true God. But the second one says, don't even worship human representations of the true God. And this is outlined in Deuteronomy 4:15-19. We're not supposed to make pictures of God that lower our conceptions of what the true God is like. And too often we do that. I do that. I think, well, I have God all figured out, when in fact, I am well aware that I am not even close to that. So I have had to adjust my hopes over the years. My faith hasn't changed. My faith is strong. But my hopes of what I find as I do my geology research have had to change. And I give some examples here of others whose hopes have had to change. I'm not going to go through all of this, but I think it's very important to realize that one can maintain a strong faith, but at the same time change what exactly one is hoping for. Okay, the second part is doing rigorous science. Some of the topics that we're doing research on, some of the research approaches and guidelines that we use, and a summary from one of my science colleagues. So here are the research topics. I put together a poster for the general conference session in, I guess it was 4 years ago. Respecting God's word, God's world, and people in God's image. Again, I'm not going to go through this whole poster, but it is available online. You can look at it to see what it is. The range of people that we have working on various projects. We're doing large-scale research, looking worldwide throughout the geologic column, as well as a number of places around the world. A little bit of our results. And then I've outlined the approach that we use: scripture, nature, looking for harmony, and how we treat people, and finally, the message that we try to share with people. So the geologic column, these are areas, the red are areas where we are doing research. The black ones are places that I have led geology field trips. The white ones are where I have gone to give lectures and told people about their local geology. And the blue ones are where I have been on field trips for various geological meetings. So we're trying to look at it worldwide with the understanding that the record in Genesis 6-9 talks about a worldwide catastrophe. So we're trying to look at the issues worldwide. We're looking at plate tectonics, the geology as it's related horizontally. I have a whole lecture that I'm going to give on this. And we teach a class that emphasizes plate tectonics. There is a lecture available online, one that was given in Korea at Samyuk University a couple of years ago, where you can see some of the topics that we talk about related to plate tectonics. Another talk I give is on radiometric dating. We've been working on this for a number of years. Again, you can see the lecture online. This one I gave in Korea. Topics about why it's important, how it works, what do creationists say, what are the problems, and what our own research related to it has been. So what kind of approaches and guidelines do we use? I appreciated a book chapter by Randy Yonker a few years ago. I guess it was more than 20 years ago now, where he talks about the Andrews way of doing archaeology. Be forthright with findings. Do not minimize problems or stretch interpretations of data to explain things away. Do not make claims beyond what the data can support. Be quick and complete in publishing results. Engage and work within mainstream scholarship. Include a diversity of people and specialists. And take the history of the Bible seriously, but do not place upon archaeology the burden of proving the Bible. So I have taken his guidelines and outlined them for myself. So some of these are similar to the ones in the previous slide, but I'll kind of go through them. Don't expect science to prove the Bible. Don't claim from data more than what it can support. Don't minimize problems or stretch interpretations. Be slow to judge scientists as sinister. Be patient. Don't expect quick answers. Work within mainstream scholarship. Test ideas and models to see if they fit the data from nature. Address the big picture more than scattered features, and work toward a constructive model more than attacking existing models. And these are some of the responses that creationists give for radiometric dating. So it's just one of the issues, but it's the one that we've probably spent the most time on, that our group and I have spent the most time on. So these are the kind of responses that are given. Some of them have some validity, but they also have problems. And I have a description of each of these, as well as the problems, as well as examples from the Bible in the book chapter that I've written. So I can come back and talk about these some more if you want. Ultimately, I would suggest that for us, as we look at the time issues, we really don't have answers. And all I can say is God's a lot smarter than I am. But I do find that when God intervenes, it results in strange effects on time perception. And I've given some examples there. I can come back and talk about that a little bit more if you want later. Okay, the third part, working within the scientific community and developing a relational approach. I have found the scientific community to be an excellent and accepting place to work. Here I give some names of some of the people that have especially impacted my life. I could tell all kinds of stories about that. Some of those stories are in the Adventist Review back, what is that, about 5 years ago, Making Friends in the Scientific Community. I give some specific examples. But then I put in here a letter that one of my geology colleagues sent to an online geology discussion forum where he emphasized being able to work with somebody who's a Christian. He emphasized that a powerful friendship had developed, one of trust, respect, where there was freedom to discuss. He said that both of us are fascinated by nature, and I am supported by the church. I and our group had enriched his life due to the kind, thoughtful people that are part of our group. I'm a portal to the church in presenting good science and maintaining faith. And he emphasized the two books approach, that we can learn about God both from the Bible as well as nature. So this relational approach, there's plenty of examples. I switched expertise, and so I did like 15 years of nuclear physics research. That's what my PhD is actually in. But then I tell people I had a midlife crisis and switched to geology because that seemed to be more what the Geoscience Research Institute needed, was somebody with expertise in geology. So I've been doing geology research for the last 20, 25 years. And I have plenty of stories I could tell, but I'll probably come back and tell some stories later. Here's some examples of stories, some of the on field trips that I've taken with geology groups and so forth. Here's a recent example. Last April, we were working in the Galápagos, and we arranged for one of the Galápagos National Park boats. And there were 6 of us in the group and 6 of the crew. And we spent 10 days on the Galápagos National Park boat, taking us around to the islands that we needed to begin our research there in the Galápagos. It just happened that the one Sabbath we were there was over Easter weekend. And I wasn't planning this, but they asked me to give a presentation for the group, including a biologist that was part of the national park who had come along to work with us. And he appreciated the discussion that we had talking about science and religion topics. I spend a fair amount of time putting things on Facebook, and I try to post something every day related to science or religion, some personal things that are happening and so forth. So this is one of the ways I have of reaching out to society to talk about my beliefs as a Christian and as a scientist. About 20 years ago, or 10 years ago, I was asked whether I was really willing to do apologetics or not. And there were questions about that, maybe I wasn't doing what I was supposed to be doing. So I spent some time putting together a 20-page response about apologetics with numerous examples of what I had done over the years. And my summary of that is here. My lifelong goal has been to study and share Jesus, Christianity, and the Adventist message, especially with those of a scientific mindset. I have found that hard rock, that is igneous and metamorphic geology, granitic and volcanic rocks, that kind of apologetics is especially difficult. We're doing the best we can, but much research is needed. I have found, at least for me, apologetics can often be poor and ineffective, and I prefer the term sharing instead of arguing. Apologetics often seems to be arguments, and I think there's a place for that, but I have found that often just getting into arguments isn't particularly useful. And I'm trying to develop productive ways of sharing the big picture of a good and powerful creator God as exemplified in Jesus Christ. So here's some examples of the kinds of lectures I give. I've already mentioned some: the wonders of creation, physics and cosmology, various geology topics, history, philosophy, theology, and how do I go about sharing. Then finally, how do I work within the science community? It's a little different way than some others do. I emphasize cooperation, becoming an authority in some area of research. I recognize the need for evidence and reason, but also for something more. And I look at Jesus' approaches and methods. So first of all, a different way. Meet people where they are. Be in the world and not of the world. And there's examples of that with Joseph, Daniel, Esther, and so forth. Be responsible, dependable colleagues. Augustine said, people will trust you in areas they don't know about only after they've learned to trust you in areas that they do know about. And I would emphasize the need to win people more than arguments. The issues are only important as they affect people. And I prefer emphasizing the agreements rather than polarizing, alienating, and bashing evolution. And as I work in the science community, I often don't say too much about my beliefs, but just my lifestyle and people knowing where I come from. I am asked questions. And when I'm asked questions, hopefully I have answers to give. Treating people well, the last message of mercy to be given to the world is a revelation of his character of love. Men may combat and defy our logic. They may resist our appeals, but a life of disinterested love is an argument they cannot gainsay. And the strongest argument in favor of the gospel is a loving and lovable Christian. And then finally, a book that my daughter recommended to me. She's a English professional. She got her degree at Notre Dame in early modern literature, studying John Milton, Paradise Lost, and so forth. And she recommended this book, Walking on Water by Madeleine L'Engle. And the entire book is good, but there's one particular sentence in there that I have appreciated so much, I put it on a little slip of paper and it's beside my office door. It says, we draw people to Christ not by loudly discrediting what they believe, by telling them how wrong they are and how right we are, but by showing them a light that is so lovely that they want with all their hearts to know the source of it. I first got some of these ideas from Leonard Brand's book, the first edition of his book back in the 1990s, where he has suggested this kind of approach. And it kind of surprised me because at the time I thought, well, creationists are supposed to be combative and they're supposed to be fighting evolutionists. But he suggested, no, that may not necessarily be the best way to do things. So how does one go about emphasizing cooperation instead of conflict? Again, in the Desire of Ages, it says, what Abraham was in the land of his sojourn, what Joseph was in Egypt, and Daniel in the courts of Babylon, the Hebrew people were to be among the nations. They were to reveal God to men. In the call of Abraham, the Lord had said, I will bless thee, and thou shalt be a blessing, and in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. So how can we go about being a blessing in the scientific community? Going among them, desiring their good, and meeting them where they are. So we have tried to benefit the scientific community by writing papers related to topics that are of importance and interest to the community. These are some of the papers that we've published in the last 10 years related to geology. I could also give a list of a couple dozen papers in nuclear physics previous to that as well. There's a place for evidence and reason, but there's a need for more than that. Kierkegaard talks about reason plus the leap of faith. Chesterton says one can only find truth with logic if he has already found truth without it. Anselm talks about faith seeking understanding. John 14:6, Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. And so it seems like truth is more a person than a set of facts. And C.S. Lewis talks about an obstinacy in belief. It's not an argument that demands your assent, but a person who demands your confidence. Faith in a theory is proportional to the evidence, but faith in a person is based on experience. And I have a story about my wife that gives an example of the need for more than evidence and reason, which I can share with you later if you ask, but I think I'll skip that for right now. So, Jesus' approaches and methods. How do I deal with it? I found the Desire of Ages to be extremely helpful in giving ideas of how to interact in the science community. And I give some examples here of where I have specifically used the Desire of Ages to know how to deal with organizing meetings, as I have been questioned about my beliefs, and in my lectures. So, what has Jesus done for me? This was a devotional I gave for some meetings in Utah back in 2002. Jesus' command to the Gadarene demoniacs was to tell what great things the Lord has done for you. Desire of Ages says, although the demoniacs could not answer doctrinal questions, they could tell of what Jesus had done in their life. And often I do not have the science answers that people expect me to have, but I can say something about my experience with Jesus. So, in the Desire of Ages, based on Matthew 10:19, it says, when they deliver you up, take no thought how or what you will speak. No prepared speech. Their preparation was to be made day by day in treasuring up the precious truths of God's word. And no religion on your sleeve to convert them. I found that my science colleagues don't appreciate me always talking about religion. So instead, we find in Desire of Ages, it says it was by personal contact and association that Jesus trained his disciples. He did not sermonize as men do today. He did not command his disciples to do this or that, but said, follow me. So less of the negative, not the sharp arguments. We are not to thrust and crowd and condemn. Don't think it your duty to say at once to the people, we are Seventh-day Adventists. Do not at the outset press before the people the most objectionable features of the faith. Follow other methods than condemning wrong. The bitterest opponents should be treated with respect and deference, and an evil spirit is too often allowed to cast drops of gall into our cup. So instead, present something better. In the Sermon on the Mount, he did not make a direct attack on the errors of the people. He taught them of something infinitely better than they had known. For the first evangelists, they were to enter into no controversy as to whether Jesus of Nazareth was the Messiah. But in his name, they were to do the same works of mercy. And with Thomas, it outlines how we were to treat those whose faith is weak and make their doubts prominent. Jesus did not overwhelm Thomas with reproach, nor did he enter into controversy with him, but he revealed himself, because unbelief is seldom overcome by controversy. It is rather put upon self-defense and finds new support and excuse, but let Jesus in his love and mercy be revealed. So, I find all kinds of lessons in the Desire of Ages, but for now, I won't go through those. I can come back to that later if you have a question. So, in conclusion, what kind of a conclusion do I come up with? My belief and message are based on a better picture of our Creator more than a better scientific model. The picture the Bible and nature present of a Christ-like God, a powerful God who does things far beyond what humans can understand. So I accept my limitations and the possibility of apparent paradoxes. I am not static, but continually learning with freedom and curiosity. I use evidence and reason, plus the inspired record, to develop a reasonable faith. And I point to a good God who's caring and trustworthy in the face of evil and failure, who's fair and just as well as merciful, who created the world for a reason. We're not just here by chance. We have purpose and meaning. Evil needs fixing, and it's not annihilation at the end, but a happy ending. And I try to lead a community that is authentic, safe, welcoming, and graceful, careful, dependable scientists in service, as well as a church that's trying to make the world a better place. So why do I believe? Yes, there's evidence, but often it's different. And Christ pointed out that it was an evil or wicked, adulterous generation that wanted a sign. And in fact, that was Christ's temptation, was to present signs, to jump off the temple and so forth. And Jesus didn't do that. It says he presented no earthly attraction, no clash of arms. So why do I believe? It's because I want that character. The character of his son, because to this revelation, Jesus desired the minds of the people to be directed. So it points to the power of Jesus in us, the power that can turn the world upside down. The gospel of Christ is the power of God to salvation. Never a man spoke the way that he speaks. He dwelt among us, and as many as received him, to them gave he power to become the sons of God. So, as we see God's power and goodness in nature, may it remind us of the power of God we can experience in our own lives to become his children. Not power to argue for a particular viewpoint, whether in science or theology, but power to care about those who touch our lives, which is the power of the gospel of Jesus Christ. So that's my story. So now I hope that it's given you something to think about, and we can have a discussion as to what would be helpful for you.
Thank you so much for sharing with us, Ben. So you can, I'm not sure if anyone is going to want to see the slides, but okay, we do have a few hands already.
Shall I stop sharing?
Yeah, you can stop sharing.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So, Linda, your hand was up pretty quickly. So I'm going to ask you to unmute and join the conversation. And belated happy birthday to you too.
Oh, thank you so much, Sherry-Ann. How sweet of you to think of that. Yes. Yes, it was the big one, the big 8-0 for me this week. I've now achieved my 4 score. So, but Ben, thank you so much for your presentation. I have to tell you that I just became momentarily ecstatic when I saw Walking on Water by Madeleine L'Engle on your screen. I have my own copy of it that I've probably had for about 50 years. It's yellow inside. And I want to ask you about something in relation to that, more for fun, just to hear what you might have to say about it, because it's been one of the most precious things in this book to me through all these years. And she, for those of you that are not familiar, very briefly, Ms. L'Engle goes down to this place called Dog Pond, which is near where she lives. And she goes down there to think and to consider life and whatever. And she says, one of the greatest sorrows which came to human beings when Adam and Eve left the garden was the loss of memory. And to illustrate that, she says that once when she was sitting there by Dog Pond, that she was thinking about Peter walking across the water to meet Jesus. And she says, and this is my question to you, as long as he didn't remember that we human beings have forgotten how to walk on water, he was able to do it. So do you think from a scientific standpoint, there are things that our forebears, Adam and Eve, were able to do, and instead of so much removing or not having the ability, we had the ability to do things like walk on water or fly or whatever that perhaps we will have again one day?
I don't think I have been asked that kind of question before, but I love that question. And it's going to make me do some thinking. I'm not sure I can come up with a good answer immediately, but
well, it's provocative, is it not? It's provocative because we never how to do those things, but conversely, we knew how, but now we can't remember.
Our understanding of the serpent was that apparently it was able to fly beforehand. So that might be an example of animals having past abilities that they don't now that have been lost. So I'm sure that that's very possible for Adam and Eve as well. So yeah, thank you for that. But now I'm going to have to think about it a little bit. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Linda. George, please go ahead and join the conversation.
Well, Ben, thank you for this great debut on this program here. Welcome, and I hope you come back many times because you have materials for to go for ages here.
Oh, I have too much to say, yes.
Yeah, I know that. Can see that. You had one slide about the dating methods, and that caught my attention because very often we have, people trying to brush off the validity of those methods. Could you comment a little bit on some of them, at least their weaknesses, their strengths, and the validity, the accuracy, and so forth? Thank you.
I will be happy to do that. I have a whole lecture on it, and I will not do a whole hour's worth. But that is probably one of the main things we've been looking at over the last 10, 15 years, and before that as well. It's actually one of the reasons I got my PhD in nuclear physics was to look at radiometric dating from the physics perspective. But over the last 10 years, we have done radiometric dating on hundreds, thousands of samples, zircon grains, maybe even as many as tens of thousands. And I have found the method to be impressive. I have found it to give results that make sense, that agree with other things that we find, especially in our work in Peru, but also other places. We've dated rocks from Africa, from right around Loma Linda. For those of you who are familiar with Loma Linda, about 5 miles away is Box Springs between Loma Linda and Riverside. We've done dating on that. We come up with ages of about 100 million years for that. It's very consistent, and we can see patterns. Last week, we got another, probably another 1,000 ages on zircon grains last week, and we're able to see patterns. So basically, I think that radiometric dating does very well. And we have been able to work with the people of the University of Arizona, their Lasercron Center. It's an excellent radiometric dating lab. We've had very good relations with them. When we go there, after we leave, they say, we're glad you were here and we're happy to have you come back whenever. We will probably be going back again in another few months, maybe another 2 times this year. So I find that the method works well. It's not perfect. And the radiometric dating community realizes that there's all kinds of things that need to be taken into account, but it does seem to be able to say something about the geologic record and help in understanding the sequence of events and the time frame for the events. So what do creationists have to say about it? I had a list of about 8 different responses that creationists give. And I'm actually not going to go through those 8. If you want, you can go online. You can send me an email, and I can give you a link to the PowerPoint presentation that I gave in Korea that lists some of the radiometric dating issues. I actually think I also have a written document on the GRI website that talks about them. So there's about 8 different general categories of creationist responses to them. And I find them to be helpful, but not really very definitive. They give some ideas of ways to respond. But in fact, I find that radiometric dating works very well. Maybe I'll just leave it with that for now, without dominating the whole discussion about just radiometric dating. But if others have questions, I can come back and say some more about it. But your question is one that I always get asked, And it's a very important question, and one I have dedicated, what shall I say, 20 years of my life to. So there's a lot that can be said. But thank you for the question.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, George. I know you say you don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but I did make a note about time and radiometric date aging, that slide that you had. And as I was listening to your response just now, and you spoke about the 8 different responses that creationists usually give, and what came to mind was, does there need to be a response besides this is the scientific evidence? Does there need to be a creationist response? Because God is creator, and what the scientific record unfolds, both things can be true. So why does there need to be a creationist response?
Basically, in many ways, I totally agree with what you're saying. I think you have a very good point. I would partially respond by saying time does seem to be an issue, especially for Adventists, since it's on our name, a short past and a short future. And in some ways, I would say time is an issue for us when bad things are happening to us. And if the bad stuff happens for a short time, we're not quite as worried about it as if the bad stuff is happening for a long time. And that seemed to be what the souls under the altar were saying. How long, O Lord? How long until the bad stuff is over? How long does all this bad stuff have to go on? And so I like the idea of a short past for since evil started and a short future until it's over. And that seems to be the essence of what Adventists stand for, is part of our name as Seventh-day Adventists. I'm not sure that we have many answers in that area. And so I think you're right. Maybe we don't have to have an answer for it. But we always get asked it. I always get asked it. So that's the reason I feel like we have to have something to say. And so I can talk for a long time about it, but I do know that time is an issue. So, for example, last Sunday I was running the LA Marathon, and I'm getting slower and slower and slower. And so for me, time was an issue, and I wanted to get finished and so forth as quick as possible. But last Sunday, I really didn't do it very fast. I did fine, but I just was extremely slow. So in that case, time was an issue, yeah.
Okay, all right. Lauren, sounds like we need to invite Ben back to talk about time.
Yes.
But
Yes.
Lauren, you have the floor.
Yeah.
Please go ahead and join the conversation.
Thank you so much, Ben. This has just been such a pleasure to have you here. Just aside, some of you will know that one of the people who started Adventist Today was a rather opinionated guy named Irvin Taylor. And if you'd ever known Irvin, you knew he could really argue. He went into radiometric data. He went into dating because somebody had told him that it didn't work and it wasn't true. And he turned around and devoted his life to it. Actually, I think wrote some kind of textbook or something at one point.
Yeah, full book. Yeah.
Interesting guy. Anyway, let me say before I forget, next week, I always make this little announcement in here, Ben, for people who are still here. Next week, we're having a professor of theology from Union College, although I think he's retired, Malcolm Russell. A lot of you know Malcolm. Malcolm is going to be talking about he wasn't sure when I talked to him. He was either going to be talking about the theological underpinnings of the current Middle East conflict, which I think would be a great topic, or he's going to be talking something about Lent and Easter, which also would be a great topic. I love when we have these current topics. I want to say, Ben, the thing that makes me happiest is how you emphasized the spiritual underpinnings to everything that you do. The character of the creator. To me, that's everything. That's what and there's a great deal of theology that I can overlook. I mean, theology and science even that I can overlook if I understand that something really is Christ-like. And I'd go so far as to say that I've overlooked a lot of anti-theology even. I have known atheists who are extremely Christ-like, and I give them credit for that. And I've got to believe that the Creator understands that too. Okay, that's how far out I am on this topic. It is so important. You may have known, or if you don't, I know somebody here might have known, a chap named Earl Augard. From PUC years ago. When I was a pastor in California, I invited Earl to come and talk to my church about creation, and he was a creationist. I think it was Brian Ness who told me he was such a hard teacher, such a rigorous teacher that he gave fewer A's in his class than he had in his name, which I think is just a great line. He had four A's in his name. But I really liked Earl, and he was pretty strong on a traditional view. I don't know that he was necessarily short chronology, but he was very much a creationist at that time.
Yeah.
But I remember this, and I'm going to run it by you. There's the whole runway to get to this point. I had a church in Palo Alto that was full of scientific people. And people were kind of pushing him and challenging him a little bit. And I just remember him saying this. He said, I got to tell you that the theistic creationists or evolutionists, the people who believe in evolution, but still believe that there is a creator in it in some way. Back then, I don't think the term intelligent design was being thrown around quite as much. But he said, I want to tell you, those are your allies, not your enemies. And boy, that kind of set me back after him talking about creation for a while and then saying those people are still on our side. And to me, that was very meaningful. And I have remembered that and appreciated that through the years. And I just thought I'd mention that to you. And what's your reaction to that?
Okay, I'll make two comments. I think you've said some very important things. First of all, I really like Irv Taylor, and we got to be friends.
Oh, good.
To the point that he said, "Well, why don't you come work in my lab?" So I spent a year working in his carbon-14 lab at UCR, University of California, Riverside, and so we go and do stuff together. I collected some samples, ran them through the processes there, and learned a lot about carbon-14 dating as a result. So Irv could be a little prickly at times, but in fact, I liked him a lot, and it didn't bother me. Yeah, he would.
I think he'd qualify as the phrase curmudgeon comes to mind.
Yeah, he'd needle me sometimes, but actually I felt like we were really good friends, so I enjoyed working with him. As far as allies, that leads actually to the second part. I have found that people have a range of approaches to harmonizing science and religion. And I have found the different approaches, each one to have its benefits. And so I think you talked about theistic evolution, that these people are allies of ours. And I would agree with that. These people are ones who are believers in God, and they see God as using processes as his method. Now, I'm not a biologist, so I can't really address the biology part of it. And I would be uncomfortable with God using long ages of pain and competition and survival of the fittest and the rule of tooth and claw and death as his method of development. But I can understand why theistic evolutionists see that as one way of harmonizing the science and their understanding of God. But the intelligent design people also, they kind of fit in a different category. The intelligent design people see the design in nature, and they believe that God directly designed different major groups. But many in the intelligent design are more than willing to accept the long ages. They say that God still worked over long ages. Some of the most prominent, in fact, one of the most prominent is Bill Dembski, who's written a book entitled The End of Christianity, where he's not referring to Christianity stopping, but what is the purpose? What is the end goal of Christianity? And he emphasizes God as a designer, but in that book, he doesn't have much to say about young earth. He doesn't have much good to say about young earth creationism. And so he sees the design, but accepts it over long ages. So I would say that there's different people use different methods to harmonize things. I also have good friends who believe that the entire universe is young. And when I read the Bible and look at what the Bible has to say, all by itself, that type of approach seems to be the most consistent. So I am understanding of the young earth creationists who see the entire universe as young. And so for each of these different approaches, I see the pros and cons of each one and try to find ways of building bridges to them rather than putting up walls. And people like to put up walls, and I don't know, maybe at times that's important, but my approach has been different than that, and trying to find ways to build bridges to all different kinds of people and draw them in instead of pushing them away. So thank you for that question. I really appreciate it.
And thank you for the answer. And again, thank you for putting the concept of being a Christ-like, God-like person at the top. That's it. That's where we're all headed. We're all in that boat, at least.
Exactly.
At least.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much for that question, Lauren. Ed, please go ahead and join the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you, Ben, for your presentation. This first thing I'm going to say is just a throwaway. It's not really why I'm talking. I read the book, The Great Influenza by John Barry some years ago about the 1918-19 influenza epidemic. And came to believe in some kind of evolution because of that. Because a key part of the story of that pandemic was the chase by scientists to catch up to the evolution of the virus. They wanted to design a vaccine, but the vaccine has to be designed according to the virus it's after. But it kept changing. And I thought, whoa, what is that? Sounds like evolution to me. Now, I won't take that any further. Just a little interesting bit of my history. I'd like a little background understanding, Ben, if you wouldn't mind, about the GRI. Does it exist to build the scientific case for evolution? Or conversely, does it exist to discredit evolution and conventional geologic history? And perhaps third, is it intellectually neutral enough that if the research done seemed to contradict something from Seventh-day Adventist belief, would you be able to promulgate that? So those are my three questions, just to get a little understanding of GRI.
Those are absolutely excellent questions. I appreciate those. First of all, I liked your comments about influenza. I have not read that book. My understanding of evolution, biological evolution, is very limited, so I can't really address that topic. But thank you for your comments along that line. As far as GRI, my understanding was it was started in about 1958 as carbon-14 was being developed to answer Origin's questions, especially about carbon-14. Now, it's grown much beyond just carbon-14, but that was kind of the reason it was started. I think different people have different opinions about what the purpose of GRI is. And there is a mission statement that is often read at the Faith and Science Council, as well as at the operating committee meetings, board meetings, and so forth, to remind us of what the purpose is. And I don't have it memorized, but it's basically research and education. And it specifically says that the intent is to support the church's position. And so you are right that it is not a neutral arbiter in these discussions. So what happens when you find data that contradicts? And that's a little bit of a tricky situation. And I will give you an example from a Sabbath school class that I taught a couple weeks ago. I led the discussion. I didn't really teach the class, but our particular Sabbath school class goes through various books of the Bible and tries to find out what the different chapters have to say each week. And we were in 2 Samuel last week, and we were looking at Absalom, and after he had rebelled, and after there was the war, and Absalom had been killed, then a messenger needed to be sent to David. And so how do you send a messenger to David to tell him the result? Well, if the result was that the enemies had been vanquished, that was fine. But in this case, the messenger also needed to tell David that his son had been killed. And David had said, do not deal gently with my son. And so how do you go about telling people what they don't want to hear? How did that Egyptian, I guess, the Cushite, how did he go about telling David that his son had been killed? Well, he seemed to be able to say it very diplomatically. He said, may all of your enemies be as Absalom is. I don't know whether that was diplomatic or not, but David got the point. And apparently it was diplomatic enough that David did not kill the messenger. And that can sometimes happen when you are, when you tell people things they don't want to hear. They figure, well, the best solution is we'll kill the messenger, and that'll take care of the message not being what we want to hear. So one has to be careful in talking about some of this material where the things that are being found in science are not necessarily immediately obvious how one fits that into the Adventist interpretation of the first 11 chapters of Genesis. And so in my research, I am very upfront that I do not know how to fit my the data that we're finding in our research into a short time frame. I don't know how one understands radiometric dating in a short time frame, or the plate tectonics, the plates moving around in a short time frame, or heat flow. How does one get things to cool down within years or thousands of years? Basically, that doesn't happen. So I don't know how to fit it into a short time frame. But I tell people that in my presentations. Um, so basically, my conclusion is God has 1,000 ways to do things we don't know anything about, and I don't know. Maybe God is able to do it in, a year or a day or whatever, or maybe God is using process we don't know anything about, or maybe our understanding of Genesis 1 to 11 is way off. That's another possibility as well. So I don't know.
Let me comment that I noted carefully in your presentation that the research you're doing is not bearing out a short time frame.
No, it's not.
And that seems to run contrary to the recently changed fundamental belief on a short time frame for creation. And of course, that raises all kinds of questions. But I appreciate your honesty on this. By the way, we could probably make more of these Adventist Today mugs if you folks would buy them and let us make a little profit.
Thank you so much, Eddie. I would buy a couple of those mugs. So yeah. And thank you so much for your question.
I think we may actually have a few in storage yet.
Very
just
good
so
question.
You know.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Gerald, you've been quite patient. You are up next to join the conversation. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Cherianne. And Ben, you've opened things that I think all of us are confronted with. And all of us have to find our own way of living with these, I guess I'll call them facts, or at least the information that we're given. And I think a lot of us are distracted by the concept of needing to have a worldview, a scientific view that can allow us as a church to remain viable. I'm more impressed with and more distressed with the ability to live with information as a person. As I've learned things, as I've observed things, is it possible to divest two antagonistic worldviews within my own mind? I'm saying no. What should we do? And maybe I'm asking, what do you do?
Okay, that's a good question. Let's see, you mentioned a couple things. How do we remain a viable church? And I think that the Adventist church has a great deal to offer. How do we find ways of packaging it so that scientists can appreciate it? So that's one point. The second point you made is two different worldviews, and how do you live with those? And that's another one. And both of those are extremely important questions. The first one, I feel like I prefer to have that as my mission at Geoscience, is to find out ways of making the church meaningful and helpful to the scientists that I work with. And that's a little bit different than the mission statement, where the mission statement sometimes can be seen as very narrow, as just trying to support the church's position on origins. But I think that Geoscience has a much bigger mission than that, of trying to find ways of making Christianity and Adventism meaningful to the scientists, the technological world that we live in. And that's what I'm trying to do. That's what I do in the Facebook posts that I make and so forth. So I could say a lot about that, and I think it's very important. And if other people bring it up, then I'll come back and say some more. But anyway, I think you have a very good point, and I am 100% in support of it. The second thing you talked about is, how do you deal with two different worldviews? And that is exactly what I have to deal with every day.
Yeah.
And I just have to live with the paradoxes. I don't know what to do with it besides saying that when I am dealing with my theology, I want it to be in a very short time frame. But when I am dealing with my science, I don't see any way to do it that way. And so we use the standard terminology and the standard science as we are doing our science and as we write our papers. And I justify that by giving several examples. And I've already given them, but I'll mention them again. One is I do have a physics background. I did nuclear physics research for 15 years. And part of it was having to treat light as both a wave and a particle at the same time, and electrons or pions or whatever particles we're dealing with as both a wave and a particle at the same time. So that seems to be a paradox. How can it be both? But under some conditions, it's one. Under some conditions, it's another. And so that's kind of how I've justified living with the paradox, that it depends on the situation you're in as to what model you use to explain it. I mean, even in nuclear physics, there's two different basic models for the nucleus. There's the nuclear shell model as well as the liquid drop model. So depending on what properties you're looking at, you have to use different models. And I think that in theology, again, I am no theologian at all, but it seems like there's a paradox to have a God who knows the end from the beginning, but yet I have free choice. And I've heard people explain it, that it's not really a paradox, and they're probably right. But for me, it's still a paradox. And how can Jesus be both creator and created at the same time?
Yeah.
And I think that's been a paradox for the Christian church since, I don't know, I don't know my church history, but the Nicene Council, I guess, or whenever it was that they decided that Jesus was both fully God and fully man at the same time. So, yes.
Thank you. May I posit one corollary question?
Okay.
Do you think it's easier as a scientist to deal with those apparently disruptive dichotomies, or more so? What do you experience?
I think maybe it's easier because I don't have a problem dealing with paradoxes. I have to deal with it every day. And whether it's in physics or geology or whatever, I deal with it every day. And maybe it's harder for other people to do that. But maybe it's because I'm an egghead or something like that. I don't know. But anyway, thank you very much for that. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you so much, Jerry, for your question. Dr. Ness, please go ahead and join the conversation.
Okay. And hey, Ben, it's been a while since I've been in your presence, but we cross paths periodically over the years. So thank you.
I appreciate you. Yeah.
Yeah. And I know you and I both have struggled with probably similar issues of these paradoxes, or the cognitive dissonance, and another word that maybe comes up in this discussion. And you talk about the outward sort of facing aspects of GRI, but I want to look more at the inward facing, sort of a little bit. It's been touched on a few times by other people, because I think within our church, I feel like that often we're not given the freedom to really be honest about where the issues really lie. And let me just give one example, because I'm a biologist, so mine mostly come from that area. But as I went through my graduate program and research since that time, it was always said in my program at Walla Walla that as we understand genetics and cell biology better, that it's giving more and more support for creationism. But unfortunately, from what I've been seeing, it actually also gives more support for things like the evolution of humans from primates, as one example. And it's it's to the point now where if you know the genetics of it, it's almost incontrovertible. And so what do you do with that? When we feel we have to interpret Genesis that God, made man by fiat, but yet biology seems to suggest that it was an evolutionary process that gave rise to man. So not even an age issue at this point, although it would take a long time, of course. But nevertheless, it's a completely separate issue. You don't even need time as a piece of that to make that argument. All you need is to delve into the genes and take a look. And most specifically, what's been convincing to me is the fact that we have these processed pseudogenes that are shared by chimps and humans that could not have gotten there by any other means than common ancestry. So my question at that point is, okay, as a church, maybe we need to be prepared to have at least our scientists, if not even lay people, and I know lay people struggle worse, I think, with these things, give them the freedom to develop some alternative ways of interpreting Genesis that would not be criticized. Instead, you can't. And that reminds me of the idea that we do have allies. The American Scientific Affiliation, for example, I think is a wonderful place for Christians who are creationists, because everybody there is a creationist, but different kinds. And they have what's called evolutionary creationism, how they describe their kind of central view, people like Francis Collins, for example. So I think, couldn't we, or can we, and it seems like we've had trouble with things, allow this sort of thing to be present in the church so that some people can believe one and the other. Obviously, some people get more evangelistic about it, and I'm not into that, but I think we need the freedom to openly discuss and maybe even to believe differently in some of these topics. So I don't know how much you see a lot within the church. I mean, where are we with that? I mean, can we even go that way? I mean, what signals do you get?
That is a very good question. I can't really address the biology of it because but I can address the sociology of it, I guess. And so I am finding in my geology research things that are difficult to fit into the short time frame. And so how do I deal with that? And so that's the best I can do, is saying, how do I deal with it and what do I say? And I guess that maybe that goes to the slide that I had about faith and hope. And as I talk to people, I emphasize that my faith in God, in the Bible, is stronger now than it's ever been. However, my hope for finding silver bullets that prove a short time frame has had to change. And I have realized that probably is not the best hope, not the best goal that I have in my research. And that's the reason I've kind of shifted my primary goal to something else. What I think is something bigger than that. How do I present a Christianity and Adventism that will draw in scientists? And I think that a scientist who is a committed Christian and is willing to live with those kind of paradoxes, somebody who's willing to be honest and saying either I don't know or that the data points in a different direction, I think that's the kind of a person that can draw in those people to the church and, even more importantly, draw them to Jesus. And I guess as I read The Desire of Ages, I find that Jesus didn't really get along all that well with church authorities in his day. And so maybe I don't feel too bad about sometimes suggesting that we need a little bit different approach to dealing with these science issues. However, to tell you the truth, the people that I work with in church administration have been very good to work with. And I have been amazed at how willing they are to listen to me. There have been times when I've been called in to answer questions about what I'm saying. And I have felt like those times when that has happened, that church leadership has listened to me and been supportive, or at least I didn't get fired. So, but the church has actually been extremely supportive of the research that we're doing over the years. And I have been amazed at how supportive they are. And I have taken that to heart, that it's important that I present the research in a way that encourages faith in God. And for me, that's no problem at all. I have a very strong belief in God and in the Bible, and I have no problem at all in emphasizing that no matter what I find in the science, it doesn't really affect my belief in God and the Bible. But I do feel like it's important to be honest that the data does not easily fit into a short time frame. And I'm looking at some of the big issues: plate tectonics, radiometric dating, the sequence of events in the geologic column. And I have found that as I deal with them and talk to people in the scientific community, they respect my beliefs as a Christian, as an Adventist, but that I'm willing to respect them as well as good scientists who are, they're not trying to undercut Christianity. Now, I think there are some scientists who are, but the ones that I have worked with, I would say that 99% of the scientists that I have worked with are not out to undercut Christianity. They are just, basically they're happy to work with me because I'm interested in understanding the world, and they are, and they're very supportive. So, so basically, I think you have a good question, and I think it's just the response to it is to be honest and faithful scientists as we deal with the science and as we deal respectfully with people. So,
yeah, well, I think your comments are encouraging because, I mean, I know historically the Adventist Church has had its purges at times of these kinds of things. And so, yeah, it doesn't seem like they're in that mode right now. So I'm hoping that's actually the case. But I think one last comment on this, I think it's important that when we have things, let's say, that run counter, we also need to work at ways, how do we help bolster our beliefs in the midst of those differences? In other words, if I recognize that maybe humans did evolve from primates, well, how do I fit that in then into the story of the Bible? And I think that's why we also need to bring theologians in and say, how do we, what can we do with this? What if this were true? How would we proceed? And how do we?
I think it would be useful to talk about those things. It's not my specialty, so I don't even have any idea how to go about talking about that. But I do know that I talk about the time issues in radiometric dating and so forth. So I think it's important for me. I think it's important to talk about the time issues with radiometric dating, plate tectonics, heat flow, the geologic column, and so forth. So yes, I'm very much in support of finding ways of talking about that. So thank you.
Yeah.
By the way, we really appreciate working with Amy Wyrick. She's I am hoping that we can get her to do some research in the Galápagos with us. She's a real joy to work with. So
I was kind of a little bit jealous of her getting to go down there because I would actually love to go too. But I have research that fits down there. Because mostly mine's in the area of plant systematics primarily.
Okay.
Other genetic things, but
she was a real blessing to us there back in November. We really appreciated her. So
yeah. Okay, well, thanks.
Okay, thank you.
I'll see you this summer too at GRI. I think at the
up in Washington State. Good. Yeah, excellent. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Brian. Really appreciated your questions and comments. Robert, it is time for you to join the conversation. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Bob Johnston here. Dr. Clausen, I really appreciate what you do and what you're doing. Are you acquainted with John Walton's books like The World of Genesis 1?
I have read one of his books. I think he has two or three or four.
Yes, that's
I don't
right.
know how many he has now, but I
Yeah.
have read one. Yes. Uh-huh.
He's working at it from the biblical side. You know, it was like two teams are digging a tunnel, and one is beginning on one side and one is beginning on the other. You're working from one end, and he's working from the other end, which I think is valuable. I'm not sure why we can't do that, but anyway.
Kind of like Hezekiah's tunnel.
I see that there are possibly three phases of what you're getting at. One is how, as individuals and as scientifically knowledgeable people, and also biblically informed people, can we live with paradoxes? And there are various ways. You can follow a two-track approach and say, my theology is one track and my science is another track, and they don't have to meet. Just kind of follow both tracks or something like that. Another is how do you live with scientifically oriented people in a way that they will respect you? And I guess the answer that you give to that is be a nice guy and show that you're competent. And then the third phase is how do you persuade them, which is a little more ticklish, and I don't think you got into that too much. And that's a harder thing. Now, you referred to your dog-eared copy of Desire of Ages, and that kind of implied that Jesus is some kind of a model in dealing with these things. And as I think about it, Jesus used several methods. He did use argumentation on occasion.
Yeah. Yeah.
He used miracles a lot, especially healing miracles, which is not something we're always so good at. And then being a nice person was certainly part of it too. He showed he was interested in people. Do you give very much thought about how or whether we should try to persuade scientifically oriented people of Adventism, or does Adventism have to change first?
You have asked some excellent questions, and you have three different points, and each one of them would take forever to respond to.
By the way, I'm going to look up your presentation that you gave at Samyuk. I hope that I'll find everything there that you gave this afternoon. Will I?
I gave two presentations at Samyuk. One was about radiometric dating. One was about plate tectonics. Those are the only two that I gave there. I have given other presentations about different other topics, and I think that most of them are available on YouTube or some permutation of that. But if you have a specific one that you're interested in, you can email me, and I'm happy to try to find a link for it.
Thank you.
So yeah, I'd be happy to. Okay, so I have a pad of paper here beside me that I'm writing down people's questions as they ask them so that I can kind of try to address each of the points. So you made 3 points. The first was, how do you deal with paradox? And you kind of outlined the two-track approach, which in some ways seems to be similar to Stephen Gould's approach, where he calls it NOMA, non-overlapping magisteria. And I know that that's gotten a bad rap among a lot of people. Well, you just put them in two different boxes. And so probably I would not want to quite use that approach of putting them in two different boxes. But often in practice, that's kind of what I end up doing. I think about the theology and I think about the science, and I'm trying to find ways of harmonizing them. But at this point, I often am not able to, so I have to put them in different boxes, but I'm trying to find ways of putting them together. And I think I'm not smart enough to figure out how to do it, but I know that a lot of different people have. So your reference to the books at the beginning, John Walton's books, I think he's attempting to find ways of harmonizing them. And I find his approaches to be useful. I don't necessarily think it's the only way, but I think it's important for us to look at lots of different ways. And that's the reason I put the chart up that I did of the different ways of harmonizing fiat and process. I think we need to look at these different ways and look at the pros and cons of each one. And the churches kind of seem to fit into one particular one. The Adventist church seems to prefer the old earth, young life one. And I can see definite advantages to that, but I can also see the pros and cons of others as well. So yes, on your first point, there seem to be paradoxes, and we need to figure out how to live with them. And I think that different people may come up with different ways of living with them. Okay, your second one was how do we work with scientists? So basically, you're saying be nice. Okay, well, that's probably right, and that did seem to be often Jesus' approach. Was he went among them, desiring their good, and so he was there to try to find ways of benefiting them, to bless them, and so I get that impression from the Desire of Ages that Abraham, Joseph, Daniel, and so forth were there to bless the people that they worked with, and that's one of the things that we try to do. I suppose you could boil it down to just being nice, but I'd probably try to use a different word than just being nice. And then third, how do we go about persuading them? And do we as a church need to change? I think that the church needs to grow, but in addition, I think that we need to find ways of having something to offer the scientific community, and perhaps the church does need to develop new ways of having something to say to the scientific community. You're right, at times Jesus did use argument. That's definitely true. He did use healing, although it seems like he was a little bit careful about that. He didn't want the healing. He was unwilling to use healing as an evidence. Well, let's see. He was unwilling to use healings as a sign. And so when Herod said, well, here's a whole bunch of sick people and let's see you make them well, Jesus wasn't willing to do that. And so it seems like he was not willing to use it for his own benefit. He was only willing to use healing in being a blessing to the people he was with. So it depends on how he used healing. And, sure, it was a miracle, but it was a miracle to bless. It wasn't a miracle to prove a point, apparently. And I'd have to develop that some more. And your asking the question is very helpful. I'd actually like to discuss it with you some more, because I think you probably thought a lot more about this than I have. So I'd be very happy to discuss that some more. So how do we go about persuading? And one thing is, I'm careful not to wear my religion on my sleeve. And that's often, maybe not often, but that's sometimes what Christians feel like they have to do. They have to kind of be out front all the time and pushing people. And that just turns people off in the scientific community. I remember when I was doing nuclear physics in University of Colorado, I was in a office that had 3 or 4 people in it. And so we'd sit around talking at times. And one day we were talking and one of the other guys said, I was out golfing last week and I ended up making a shot that was a mess and I let off a string of profanity. And the guy behind me, he was a Christian and he really gave me what for. And he said, that really turned me off. And he said, if there's a Christian here in this office, I'm going to boot him out. And so he knew that I was a Christian. But anyway, I made a point, well, maybe you'll have to boot me out. And he said, no, I didn't mean somebody like you. I meant the people that are obnoxious. So I think it's possible to wear your religion on your sleeve in such a way that it's a real turnoff to scientists or anybody for that matter. So I don't think wearing your religion on your sleeve is a way to persuade people. I think there are better ways to do it than being pushy and obnoxious. And I think that Mrs. White makes that point in a number of places in her writings. And I had some on the screen that I gave as examples that we need to be respectful. We don't start out with the most obnoxious, quotes, obnoxious things of our faith. Mm-hmm. And I think there is a place for a reasoned discussion. I'm not sure whether argument. I don't like arguing. At least in the area of origins, I have too often seen the arguments to generate way more heat than light. And much of the time, I don't find it useful to argue about origins things at all. And I've kind of, whenever things even slightly go in that direction, I kind of try to lead it in a different direction than that. So anyway, thank you very much for your questions on that. And I have them listed down here on my pad of paper, and I need to do some more thinking about them because I think you make very good points. So thank you very much.
All right. Thanks so much, Dr. Johnston. Eduardo, please go ahead and join the conversation.
Ben, I've been carrying this question for many, many years. I hope you can help me. I'm reading from FEMA report that in 2005, Katrina carried about 40 million cubic yards of debris to the ocean. And in the same year, the St. Gabriel River was clean of the sediment on the St. Gabriel Reservoir, which contains 3 dams, with more than 6 million cubic yards. And FEMA put a note that if you put 25 million cubic yards into a building of 100 by 100 feet, it will reach 13 miles into the sky. And my question to you, and I hope I might go back to Loma Linda soon. If you put the building of 100 by 100 feet, 13 miles high, only the Katrina hurricane, and if you multiply this all over the world, how can the world survive erosion for millions of years? That's my question. I know that scientists love perfect science. Mathematicians can figure it out, how many buildings in 1 year, and you put it onto the ocean, if the level of the sea will rise, and how the mountains or hills can survive this kind of erosion for millions and millions of years.
That's a good question. Yeah. There are, that actually is one creationist argument that there is not enough sediment in the ocean for millions of years of erosion, like you say, that the amount of sediment in the ocean suggests that it's a much shorter time frame for the erosion. I'm not a sedimentologist, and I have not specifically done those calculations. It would be easy to do, but I haven't done it. So you do have a very good question. part of the response that the geological community gives is subduction, that these sediments are eroded into the ocean, and then you have, and then they're subducted back into the mantle. So you get recycling of the Earth's sediments back into the mantle. So that would be part of the answer to the question. I would actually have to do the calculations myself to know how that would fit within a short time frame versus a long time frame, how that would fit into a flood model, do the calculations if you had all of this erosion in 1 year, of erosion of the continental sediments into the ocean, and then they got subducted. Could one do that all in 1 year? And I do enough calculations in the hard rock geology, and I would love to do it in the soft rock as well in sedimentology, but I haven't done it. So I'm afraid I can't give you a firsthand experience answer to your question, but it's a very good question. And if you send me an email, I can try to send the question to somebody who might be able to give a better answer than I can. By the way, my email is bclausen@llu.edu. So, and I guess I can put it in the chat if you want. Maybe I should do that. It looks like there's hundreds of chats here. Let me just put it in. Let me see if I can put it in here.
All right. Thank you so much for that question, Eduardo.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay. Ben,
Thank you.
Lauren has put your email in the chat as well.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Doug, it is time for you to join the conversation.
Dr. Clausen, thank you for your presentation. Very interesting. I am an analytical person, but I am not a scientist. And so I, at times, have struggled to live in both the analytical and the more soft science, as they sometimes call them. But I'm going to note your use of the word hope. In the context of Adventist, I think I know what that means. It means hope for another world, for heaven, maybe more literally. And in more recent years, I guess I have reframed that idea of hope a little differently as I have changed how I think about some of life. And there was a wonderful quote that I picked up some years ago that hope is not an emotion, hope is a discipline. I found that instructive because there are times in life where the hope of something called heaven isn't to me real enough as I struggle with the realities of life. And that fit very nicely into Brian McLaren's model of what he described he went through in his life. Starting off with simplicity. When I'm a young person, I have a very simplistic view of life, and then it got more complicated. It developed some complexity as I learned very little of what you've dealt with. And then it became perplexity, trying to fit those two worlds together. And even trying to fit the four gospels together. They don't fit. And then finally, I love where Brian wound up with something he called harmony, or a new simplicity. And I've started to realize that if I could focus on the gospel and what Jesus did in this life, in this time that I have, that maybe that's the most important thing. So I realize I'm probably asking a scientist now an unscientific question. As you read the Bible, and you're obviously not young anymore, you've probably, I'm guessing, gone through a shift from reading the Bible and interpreting it literally, stories in the Bible, to at times coming back to those stories and rereading them, maybe what I'll borrow a term, literarily. And is that true for your experience? Has that been helpful? And has that shifted your view of some of those stories from sort of having a modern scientific approach to reading the story into trying to understand them more in the perhaps pre-science world in which they were written? And has that shaped your struggle with this dichotomy at all?
Thank you very much for that. I almost feel like you have said so much there that I don't even need to say anything because I love what you've already said. So, but I will address it a little bit. As far as you talked about Brian McLaren, I have read a couple of his books that I appreciate very much. I didn't remember specifically about his simplistic, then to complexity, perplexity, and harmony, but I find that fascinating, and I would tend to agree with that. I hadn't thought of describing my own journey in those terms, but I think I would be able to, yes. As far as hope, you mentioned our hope is in the second coming, which, yes, that is my hope. When I was talking about hope, I was actually talking about a much smaller piece of hope. My hope was to find, silver bullets that prove a short time frame. And so that's just a little piece of hope. And I've had to change that hope that probably I'm not going to be able to come up with these nice, handy little silver bullets. And so I no longer hope for that. I hope for some bigger picture than that. As far as your main point and your main question, I think it's very well stated, talking about a literal understanding of the Bible versus reading it literarily. And I find that to be very important, especially as I have a daughter who got her PhD studying literary works, and she likes to discuss literary works. And I need to know how to discuss that and get the message that's being presented in those works, whether it's Paradise Lost or Samson Agonistes that were her specialties for her dissertation, or other books that she's read and commented on. I do find that helpful. It reminds me of a piece that I read, and if you're interested, I'd have to look it up and I could put a link to it. But it's this guy who wrote about taking things literally, and he gives examples of how in literary works they use the word literal in ways that are not literal. So you hear people saying, I was literally on fire for the Lord. Whereas in fact, they're not literally on fire. But sometimes the word literal apparently is used to mean, it's just used to emphasize a point rather than it needing to be taken literally. So I think you have a very good point there. And I think you would be fascinated by this little article that's online. And if you send me an email, or if anybody sends me an email with the request, I can post the link to it. That it just catches my attention because I know that that's a really big issue within Adventism is taking things literally. And how do we go about taking things literally, but at the same time understand that it is a literary piece of writing. So thank you for that. I really appreciate that. You sound like a fascinating person to talk to. So thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for your question, Doug. Clarence, your hand was up earlier because we're running out of time. Just checking if you still had a question.
Well, thank you, Doctor. Not a question, a general comment.
Thank you.
I was thinking to myself a while ago that it took the Roman Catholic Church years and years, hundreds of years, in fact, to arrive at a certain position. You made a comment a while ago saying the church certainly needs to change in some areas or something like that, to which I heartily agree. But I note also, as I was saying, Catholics took centuries to change. We probably shouldn't expect the church, which in fact is just about 200 years old. We'll say it's in its, well, maybe not in its infancy, but it's a young child. Okay? And we probably shouldn't expect this child to change so soon. What seems to me to be important at the individual level is that each man be honest in reading the scriptures and come to his conclusions and not be attached or tied to communal dogmatics. Churches will have their positions. The individual must have his position. And I don't expect the Adventist church to change. On the matter of origins, the Catholic Church finally, officially came to the place where it could say what is said in Genesis does not invalidate the theory of evolution. It does say that. I have the text right here from the Catholic Truth Society published a version of the Bible. And in the introduction to Genesis and to Genesis, especially Genesis 1, Genesis 2, the flood stories, etc., the flood story, it says what is said here on the flood story resembles, is similar to or is tied to what is said in other flood stories. It doesn't deny it. It just says it. And the individual will come to his conclusions. So I think we will change. We will not change immediately. That's why I think it behoves every man to read, to understand, and come to his personal conclusions, because at the end of it all, it is, well, it's not every man for himself, but every individual man in Jesus Christ. That's what it is. For salvation, every individual in Jesus Christ. Not a church taking us to Jesus, but every individual in Jesus. So we must read, be informed, and come to our conclusions. And the church, after centuries maybe, if Jesus doesn't come immediately, will finally change. Of that, I'm convinced. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Clarence, for your comments. We are out of time. I'm going to hand over to Lauren, but thank you so much, everyone who participated. Thanks, Ben, for sharing so openly and honestly. Lauren, please take it over.
Yeah, just want to
It's a
thank
pleasure
you,
working
Ben.
with you, Cherian.
This has been great, Ben. And I when I get out to California again, we'll go out for pie. Cliff will have the last comment, but before he does, I want to make this announcement that next week we have Dr. Russell from Union College coming, and he's going to be talking. I think he decided to choose the Middle Eastern question, and I think that's really interesting. What's going on right now is pretty disturbing, and there's been a lot of people who have said these people have been fighting the same or parallel, sort of similar battles for a long, long time, and a lot of people still fight these wars with theological justifications, which just blows my mind. So yeah, next week, Malcolm Russell, looking forward to that. Cliff, you have the last comment, and then we're going to let our guest go.
Okay. Hey, Ben, nice to see you.
Good to see you.
Haven't seen you in a while.
Yeah,
Look,
sorry.
Yeah, this is a topic which, I very quickly, I was raised on evolution. It never entered my mind to question it. I never knew anybody that questioned it. Then one day, boom, at 23 years old, I'm born again. My worldview changes at the level of zero and the zeros and ones. I mean, foundational things I believed my whole life, I now believe were wrong. And and I was able to accept it, the one area that I couldn't reconcile. And again, quite frankly, I know a lot of Adventists feel angry when suddenly it's not so simple for the 6-day creation. I was enraged, not so much that I was taught evolution. What else were they going to teach me? I was enraged that I was taught it in an absolutist, you hear the thing, as much as we know that Paris is in northern hemisphere, we know evolution is true that. All right, but here's my point though, what I just don't understand. I mean, if the Bible had gotten it so wrong, I mean, the Bible writers on every foundational thing, everything. It wasn't just a tweak here and there, but the Bible had it wrong all through the Old Testament era, all through the New Testament era, all through the Reformation, up until we finally needed Charles Darwin to reveal to us the truth. And then, I mean, if just take death alone, if what science says is true, see, why I feel so passionate about the creation thing is because the redemption thing in Scripture, creation and redemption are inseparable. You cut the guts out of creation, such as death being evil. Where's the whole plan of salvation? So, look, I know you've thought about these things before. And what would you say to somebody like me who sees it that way? To me, if what science is saying is true, if this model is true, the Bible's a lie, the plan of salvation is a lie, the cross is a lie, or at least what Paul at least says about it. I mean, I can't find any halfway point between them. And anyway, maybe that's just how my mind works, but I don't think I'm alone. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I basically agree with you. So I was taking notes as you were commenting. First of all, you mentioned that evolution can often be taught dogmatically, and I think that's I think that's a problem. I think that I think that that's not helpful at all. You mentioned the Bible headed in the wrong direction. Well, I in no way think that the Bible has been headed in the wrong direction for the last, whatever, 3,000 years, I guess, or whatever. And for me, death is the issue. The issue of theodicy is the issue. And that's the reason that I want to have it fit into a short time frame, a short time in the past since evil began, and a short time in the future till evil is over. Now, Adventists seem to be comfortable with some kind of a compromised position, old earth, young life, where they say the universe is old, and
that's what I believe.
So yeah. And I think that is one option. Scientifically, I haven't found it to be really helpful. Maybe it is, but I see it as one option. To tell you the truth, to be most consistent, I find everything as young to be the most consistent interpretation of what the
I
Bible has
agree.
to say.
I agree.
And so theologically, that would be my preference. And so I fit in nicely with the young earth creationist in ICR and CRSQ and people like that, because I find that to be the most consistent, which is even more conservative than what seems to be the accepted Adventist position.
Yeah.
But I think you have a very good point that do we see the Bible is lying all along? Well, me personally, absolutely not. I do not think that is at all. And I need to keep thinking about it. I think we're out of time, but I can see.
Anyway, but I
need to
appreciate
be
it. I have
talking
to
you
leave,
some more.
but
Yeah.
I
Anyway.
love these Sabbath schools here, even though I always have to take care of my granddaughter during this time. But I love the Sabbath school, and maybe one day I will get on here after I retire.
Anyway, good to talk to you. Good to see you.
Take care.
Well,
thank you.
Well, those lovely grandchildren are certainly very important, and I'm glad that you took a little time out from them, though. Ben, thank you. This has been a pleasure.